down here,
Oh,
Patrick.
cool. Man,
Right
that
on.
looks delicious.
Okay, great, folks. Well, so yeah, we thought we're all fascinated with craft. Thought we'd try to have an event where we can start talking about it in a bit more detail. We figured the best place to start was the app folder, the engine behind the whole thing, and you know, this is kind of an open-ended conversation, so we've got a little bit of structure as far as what we thought we could kind of tour through there and talk about. But if you have any questions along the way or want to, share some knowledge you've had in developing plugins or whatever you've been learning along the way, let's make this a conversation because I'm sure everybody has more information than everybody else. So, uh,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ben. I just want to ask a quick question, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Is everyone here part of the dev group for plugins? Probably.
I I was just invited yesterday, so I haven't even had time to look at any of the event
Okay, perfect.
element
That's
type API.
that segues into what my actual question is. My question is, are we using the app folder from the public release or from the 1.1 beta?
this is from the public release. Yeah,
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
figured we'd start with what's
Yeah.
chosen already.
Cool. I like it.
So so there's a few new things that are coming, but we'll get to those. We'll have more of these that we can get to. So you know, so I guess here we go. Here's the app folder. This is the engine behind Craft, and I guess we thought there's a lot of different themes we could take here. One is if you're interested in plugin development, there's a lot of examples right here in the code, and there's just a lot going on. So it's like reading a good book, but it's a bunch of folders. So does anybody have any questions they want to throw out there in the beginning that we can consider getting to, or shall we just kind of
Um,
start
so
going
we're focusing on the app folder. I mean, we don't need to think about how the request is even. I mean, how the request is hitting the index file out in the public folder and then coming in and setting up the environment.
Yeah, we can
Or
start at the index folder and get to the app folder if that makes the most
I,
sense.
or unless we all assume that we know how the environment's kind of kicking off.
Yeah,
Um,
so I can do that. Let me actually share my full screen and
can I ask a question of everyone? Has everyone used Yi before, or
No.
if that's how you pronounce it, or is this the first time, like me, where you're using something built on Yi?
Yeah,
I've used it in smaller projects, so I'm somewhat familiar with it.
it's new to me. It's new to me, and Twig is new to me as well.
yeah,
I have not used Yi, but I've used a few different other PHP frameworks, so I figure it's probably has a good bit in common with those.
Yeah, I mean, I had most of my experience on CodeIgniter. I mean, for years. Um, and then in the last couple of years, it's been trying out things like Laravel, but I'd never delved into Yi, and so I'm just starting to realize how powerful it can be by looking through the code in Craft, and I'm actually starting to enjoy it.
that's I think the most people I have talked to have not worked with it before either, and have grown to enjoy it pretty quickly as well. It takes a little bit to get your head around, but it's pretty powerful stuff. So all right, well let's dig in. We'll find Yi in the app folder.
Yep.
Mhm.
So we'll start right here. This is index.php. So when you're I guess we should start at htaccess, huh? When
Well,
or actually we
well,
can
you
get
can
back
just
to
explain. Yeah. All requests that aren't being resolved by the web server, whether that's Nginx or Apache, are probably going to hit the index.php because of the htaccess rules, right?
Yeah, so if there's any file out here, like in this folder, robots.txt is the only thing that would resolve to robots.txt. Any other URL that came into the system, htaccess would route it to index.php, and then we kick off craft. And I guess really this is just setting up what's going on, and it's redirecting us to the app index.php.
Yep.
And that brings us right into here, app index.php. And I don't want to. I don't know if I want to go code line by line here, but we can keep it general. I guess this is where the config variables get set up, or I guess the paths, not the config variables, the constants. So if you want to move around your folders, like if you want the plugins or the config folder to not exist right here and you want it to exist somewhere else, this is the setting that you're overriding in order to make that happen.
Yeah, I would just say it's useful to know that as a developer where those are. I mean, what the constants are, so that you can, if you're dealing with templates or dealing with, wanting to know where the storage is, you obviously can just use those constants without having to do any type of relative path.
Oh yeah.
And I would add too that a lot of those constants that Ben has highlighted there are the ones that the path service uses to resolve when you're requesting like the plugin's path or something like that.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so
So
you
it's probably
can.
better to use the service.
It is better to use the service. Basically because there might be it's highly unlikely, but the constant names might change, or there might be something might get appended to it, like there might be plugins. The plugin's path constant may resolve to two different things. One's the store comes into play, and there are packages. So I think it's always better to kind of use the service layer that will take care of any resolution and will automatically update itself if it needs to do so.
That's an excellent point.
We can get to those files later on. So
Yep.
So yeah, so I guess is there anything else we want to, I guess here we're pulling in Yi. I guess here we're also pulling in our config settings. We're checking if we want debug mode or dev mode on, which can help us troubleshoot. We're pulling in Yi. And then we're starting to load more stuff.
Yep.
So I guess, shall we open a few of these? So we had craft. What do we have? Craft, Etsy web app, and info. So here's craft and info, and then Etsy app. Or was that? What was it? FC web app. And Brad was mentioning earlier, Etsy is really just the folder that everything will place for anywhere else to go. So
Yep.
So,
I do
sorry.
have Ben. I do have one note regarding that config file you're talking about. Once the framework Yi loads, there's a couple of things on Yi that are very interesting. And for starters, once you load framework Yi, that's essentially you're kicking off the Yi autoloader. So if for some reason you wanted to do something advanced with namespaces, it might be a good idea to load your autoloader before you import Yi, so that it'll be easier to work with namespaces down the line. Obviously, that's kind of a it's an advanced topic, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up in case that there are some like Luke, you're working in with some advanced plugin development, so that might be something interesting that you might want to research on your own. Declaring your
So,
own or loading your own autoloader before you kick in Yi.
so when you say before kicking you, before it
Before
loads
this,
itself through the
yeah, like see
index.html.
this, the declaration that Ben has highlighted where you're requiring the framework Yi. Um, that is essentially what that's doing is loading, the core Yi and essentially the autoloader. And
Hmm.
since that autoloader registers itself within the application, you can definitely add another one afterwards, which a lot of plugin
Yeah.
developers, do themselves. But if you wanted to, for some reason, load it and do something more advanced, you could load it just before you require that file.
Okay. I haven't run into any problems yet auto loading after, so I'll keep that in mind.
Hmm.
Cool. Okay. Well, so here we get our next three: craft, web app, and info. Looks like, and I have not toured all these files myself, so we're kind of scanning them quick here. Or speak up if you have. Looks like we're loading our packages in this one and getting version info.
Yeah, I think this is all the kind of scaffold to check packages and to check installation and versions and things like that.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
getters and setters on versions.
Okay. And web app is. Looks like this. I've run into this one in troubleshooting a few bugs. This seems to be where a lot of once the page starts loading, this seems to be an active file.
This is the inheritance of the main Yi application, I think, class.
That's correct.
So
This is one
that's
of the most important files right here.
Yeah.
okay. All right. Is there anything in it we want to look at, Selvin? Or
I don't think that there is anything that it's probably something that we can discuss on a different day, probably.
yeah. Okay. We'll have a web app specific
Yeah.
meeting. Okay. All right. Good. And info is just pulling in the latest craft build info.
Yeah, I'm assuming this file is like built with their like they've got. I think the Pixel and Tonic guys have got some auto-generated files for versioning when they deploy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
they're just putting it in a separate file so they can do that.
Yeah, and I believe they do that because this is the first file that gets overwritten once you do an update, and that's one of the reasons why you need loose permission or writable permissions on your app folder in order for an update to execute properly. And I think this is one of the files that gets overwritten first, or at least it gets used to compare versions and such.
For migrations when they're migrating their database.
Correct.
Yeah.
Cool. So as far as craft is concerned, once we kind of get routed into this app folder, the craft file is the one setting up. It looks like it's setting up a lot of the package stuff, and then the web app is probably the one redirecting us to templates and controllers and other places where we might need to be going.
So
Does that sound
essentially,
correct?
yeah. So the main craft file will extend the main Yi file, kind of like the core application, and the web app will actually extend a web app component from Yi, and that one basically takes care of the routing and the requesting of or the name resolution for controller action. If anybody is familiar with MVC, so that's kind of what the web application component does. It takes care of the requests and it translates those into proper controller action calls for the most part. I mean, it does a few other things, but that's part of it.
Cool.
All right. Well, great. So now we're going in every direction now in the app folder.
Well, we can probably close those down and just go
like
through
a
the
shotgun
folders now.
Yeah. All right. So
You can
I So yeah, so where do we go from here? So there's a lot of things going on now. I think the Etsy folder is kind of a tour in itself of what's going on in there. But I think when we start getting into the routing, when the way we're working with the system, Brad and Brandon get to worry a lot about that folder. When we start looking into the system more, the folders more relevant to our plugin development are a lot of the folders that are going to match the folders in our plugins. So our plugins are going to have controllers. In the future, they'll have element types. They can have a lot of these other folders, but some are more common, like field types, helpers, maybe migrations when we start updating add-ons and stuff, models and records when we get into submitting forms and database manipulation, the resources for the assets we're using, templates, services. I don't need to read them all. I know. Uh, so
That's good.
a
It's
lot of
good
these,
because yeah.
yeah. I guess the final ones here, really, the widgets one and the variables are other ones we're going to see a lot in our plugins. And really, this when I first started using Craft, they were still developing the documentation a lot, and I think several of others of us here are too. Sometimes looking at the documentation for answers, and we might not find them there, and quickly the best place to look just seemed to start being these folders. Once you start understanding what you're trying to do, every one of these folders is an example of how the craft control panel is handling something that you might want to be handling in your plugin, or in the case of building out even the front end of your website, the templates folder really is a bunch of code for the back end of Craft that is also usable on the front end of your website. So if you could find an example of what you want to be doing in Craft Control Panel, you just need to figure out how it's being routed to find a similar file that you could pull code from to create the front end, a similar functionality on the front end of your site. So I guess how are other people looking at
Yeah,
this app folder for
I'm
plugin?
finding it's a fine line between following the documentation and wanting to start using a bunch of other bits and pieces or copying bits and pieces that they're doing inside the app folder, because you don't want to start building things out on things that are going to change, or um, they might be doing something fancy, or have a service or something, but if they haven't really documented it, I assume that they're still thinking it's not set in stone. So it's great to go into the app folder and explore, I think, obviously to learn how it works and what's available, but I think at this stage we're kind of on the edge of being able to use all of it yet. So anyway, that's the point I wanted to make, is that it's great to learn. I would stick to the documentation for the main things that you're doing in your app, and if you're going to be, but there's nothing to stop you obviously using all the services and things available to you in the app folder. It's just whether when the App Store gets released, whether their app folder or the services will still be the same. So
Yeah, I mean I
but
think that's a good point. Like we can use those services, but technically they're not supported, and they may change in the future. So if we build a plugin and the API is not documented, that plugin technically shouldn't be using those services.
yeah, well, you could build it. I mean, and if you're going to lock your version of Craft for your website and never upgrade Craft, you would know it wouldn't break because you're building it to that version. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and I know they're working hard on developing features and also the documentation. So some of it may be ready to use, but they just haven't documented it yet. So, I mean, for example, is the element type API. I mean, we're all, I think, keen to start using the element type stuff, but until only yesterday I got invited to the developer community on Google Plus. I didn't even know that there was a dev track available. I don't know how long you guys have been a part of it, but yeah. So just a warning there.
That's a fair
You
warning.
know, and I think in the more in the bigger context, one of the reasons we were wanting to be careful there is because the plugin store. I think they're even going to enforce in the plugin store if you're using undocumented things, your plugin might not even make it into the store. So if you're considering going a commercial route with your plugins, you probably want to stick to what's documented. Um,
Yeah, or check with the guys. I'm sure you could ask guys and girls at Pixel and Tonic whether they expect something to be publicly available as an API for you to use. I asked the question of the guys about using even the classes and some of the Twig macros for the front end of plugins, because there's some great code and UI elements already built inside their templates that I wanted to steal and for tables and things like that, so it looks like a native plugin. And they were fine with us using those things, the classes inside the templates folder.
Yeah, that would actually be another topic. They've developed their JavaScript library called Garnish, which seems to kind of power the UI of their back end, but it's totally undocumented right now.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to walk through that code and really see what UI enhancements are available and easy to implement
Did
from that.
they made Garnish? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean it's a work in progress, I think, but it came out of their work on their expression engine add-ons and just repeatedly solving similar problems.
Interesting.
I think it's based on base.js, so that's like a minimal object-oriented type JavaScript framework that gave them a few things for free, like simple inheritance in JavaScript and things like that. So if you want to look at base.js to see what they're doing there.
Cool.
But yeah, I think Brandon just posted while I was asleep, some instructions about triggering modals for element types, and that was, he mentioned a couple of the craft craft garnish functions to launch a modal window. But I'm sure there's going to be more documentation to come.
Yeah, I think that's all to come.
I think that's probably safe to say anything in that craft dev group is sneak preview.
Yeah.
So let's get back to these folders then and start talking about what some of them do and maybe start looking inside of them, I guess. So we'll start up top, and I'm going to kind of scan those same plugin folders because I think those are kind of the most relevant. We can dive into other ones when we feel the need there. But so controllers are really and folks, I'm a risky amateur, so if I'm saying anything that's totally false, jump in and correct me here. But controllers,
we all are.
the controllers are what's being used when a form is submitted and a form needs to do something. It calls a controller, and then that controller is going to process what it's doing. So if you're trying to do anything when a form is submitted, you're going to want to look at how the forms in the templates section are interacting with these controllers initially. And I don't know if we want to open up any to take a look at any of this.
You can open up the base controller.
The base controller.
Or the plugin controller too.
Yeah, so I guess maybe plugins or...
Yeah, there's one plugin controller.
Yeah.
So this folder, the controller folder, we can use this for all of our controllers, whether they are control panel controllers. So whether it's for a page inside your plugin, that's going to be in the control panel. So it can return a control panel style template, or it can be a controller that's handling a request through an action from a front end form. because as most of you and everyone probably knows, Crafter's control panel is written in Twig completely, just like the front end. So your controllers are living globally between both of those places. So yeah, I just thought I'd make that point.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's a good observation to make because when I first looked at Craft, I thought the controllers were only handling CPU requests, but they're actually, you can use them in the front end as you pointed out. So that's a good point.
I should have had a demo in mind. I was just looking for an example form here. All right, did you go on?
I was just going to say, yeah. So what you're going to bring up there is like a form that the way I think Craft does it on the front end is that the form will have like an action parameter on the form. Is that correct? An action?
Yeah. So
yeah.
They don't put the action parameter on the form element. They put it as a hidden input field.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is neat.
Because Craft is kind of globally. I mean, when having the action blank on the post of the form tag is just going to submit it to Craft itself. I mean, it's going to really submitting it to the same page that you're on if you have a blank action there. But Craft is then going to look at the data being passed along through the post request and look to see if it has an action parameter or action variable inside the post request, and then route it to the controller of the value.
Correct.
Okay, great. So in this case, we have the user's save profile action is going to be routed to the controller's users, and was that save file? Did I save profile? So action save profile, and so that's routed to this action save profile function. And I guess I don't understand why this is prefaced with action. It seems to work if you do that or not that in your plugins, so I'm not sure if this is just kind of a namespace for your own reference, or does anybody know
I'm
why?
just guessing. Yeah, I'm just guessing it's.
If you
Sorry,
only
go ahead.
have if you only have one action within the controller, I believe you can get away with it. But if you have more than one, you might have to prepend with action. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that. But I know that's kind of common behavior when it comes to controllers and services, because they have a convention in the docs where you would, for naming a service, you would use the plugin name underscore the service name. But if you only have one service defined, you can skip using the underscore and just kind of have the name of the the name of the service. So that might get carried over onto the controller methods. But that's an assumption I'm making by trying things out. Not exactly sure on it, but that's one, might be one way that they're handling it.
Okay.
Now, there is one difference, though. There is one difference that if you take the action out and define a method as protected or private, I don't think you'll be able to access it from the post request. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone.
Say that again?
Yeah.
I'll say it a different way maybe. Like the method or the function there called action save profile is a public method for the class, and so Craft is able to access that because it's public. But you could have some methods. You can have some methods in your controller that they're not there for the purpose of handling a request. Maybe they're just a little helper function that you're not going to put into a separate file. And and so you might have another function down below called private give me a URL function, and that might just return a string or a URL or something like that. But Craft isn't going to route that any type of request to those functions because they're just used internally inside your controller.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's correct. Thanks, Luke.
Okay, great. And so we won't go into too many more details here, but I think the one thing you'll start running into a lot when you start using controllers is getting back to the page you came from, either with errors or with success. And so you'll see this craft URL manager set root variables function frequently, and this is what passes back to the page the twig variables that you're able to use on the page. So this is passing the account variable back to the page with all of the data that's in the user variable here. So, all right, so just to keep moving, there's plenty more we can say here. We could come back later.
So I'll just point out, I mean, for the sake of those that might not have read the documentation, but so these controllers can handle requests, but you can see at the top of that file there, that function, it's requiring a post request. But you can also make it require an AJAX request. So if somebody hits this controller's URL, routed URL, and they're just hitting it on their browser, and you've made it be an AJAX request, then it'll just return a 404. But if you're calling the page through AJAX in JavaScript, maybe this function here is returning some JSON data, then you could have the controller require an AJAX request only. So there's a few functions. So have a look in the documentation for what you can do with the requirements of this request and how Craft will handle it.
And the last thing I would add to that too is that this action you wouldn't be able to process it if you submit it from the front end, because you would have to set the allow anonymous to true in order to be able to submit it from the front end without the user being logged in.
And that would take place up here.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, here's allow anonymous.
Yep.
Yeah, so you're giving an array of all the actions that allow anonymous is on.
Okay.
Or you can just say true and it will set it to all of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think.
All right. All right. So yeah. So the controller then is handling a lot of our logic and processing, but it doesn't do anything that has to deal with database actions or anything like that. For that, we're passing the controller passes off its responsibility to the service layer. And Craft has a pretty cool service layer, and you'll be able to identify what's in the service layer when they're structured with their Craft, and then the second segment is the name of I don't even know how to say this properly, but I guess the second
if you
segment
scroll
will
down,
be the name of the
I think
service.
that user session. I'm not sure if is that a service?
So let's open the services over here.
Probably, yeah, it is.
So user session is a service here.
Yep.
But yeah, so anywhere you're not sure, you'd want to check and see if this second segment is actually the name of one of the services in the services layer there, and then this third segment is the function within that service layer. So
in theory, you could call any of these services from your plugins. Is that right, everyone?
Yep, in theory.
But the documentation, I think, lists about 4.
Yeah, and so
4 or 5.
Yeah, so yeah, and so that's where we start calling our service layer, and the service layer is going to start. I don't know exactly where all I get a little foggy here, and service layer is doing the heavy lifting. And it's the one that kind of manages the database interactions, but I don't know how much of that's handed off with the record or the record's just there to set stuff up properly.
Maybe we can talk about that when we go through to records
Yeah.
and.
Yeah, so I don't know. Does anybody else have what else happens in the service layer
Well,
that's worth
the
mentioning?
the idea I think around the service layer, and this is what I actually starting to enjoy with Craft, is that you're trying to put all your business logic or all the kind of smarts of your plugin in the service layer. So the controller the controller needs to know about the service layer and what it offers and what kind of functions you have there and stuff, but it shouldn't know how to figure out if someone's logged in. It needs to ask the service, is this person logged in? So you're trying to put all of the business logic for your application inside your services, and that stops it from being spread around, sitting a little bit in your controller, a little bit in your records or your models, and just spread around your plugin. If you can centralize the logic into the services, then you're going to have a better time, changing your code in the future.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that it does too is it makes the code more testable as well, because you can essentially mock models, um, that the service can utilize. And if you had logic in your controller, part of it in the variables, it would be really hard to have one centralized way for testing your code, because then you couldn't just mock model. You could, you would essentially have to do a lot of manual function writing in order to test your code properly.
Yeah, that might be a more advanced topic, but yeah, testing, it centralizes the testing of the logic. You're right.
So are people adding database queries to the service layer, or is that taking place somewhere else in general?
Um,
I don't know the answer.
yeah, so
Guess we
yeah,
could
no,
globally search
everyone might
create
have a
command.
different opinion, and I might be wrong. But yeah, you can see there. Are you inside a service at the moment? Entry service.
Yeah, I'm
So if you
inside
go,
the entry service, and we do have a query here.
yeah, I mean that there looks like more of a manual. Well, not manual. It's still using like the database, the database object to build the query, but it's building a query. You're right, kind of manually. That I suppose you would only do that in the services when you're kind of having to do some things that the records or the models themselves can't just handle themselves. So, for example, if you had like a record, so a record, just to explain from what I understand, so a record is using the active record model design pattern where the records class. So if you go over to a records and
Let's
you
pick a
went to a
simple
record,
one. Widgets, maybe.
yeah. So that record is inheriting from the base record, and it's defining a bunch of really it's database table columns, and relationships between tables in the database to other parts of the database. So inside the record class, you can build like say if I wanted the top 10 people or top 10 widgets, I could make a function in here that would almost query itself to return the top 10 widgets from the record or the table, and then the service would just be able to use that records method to get the top 10. But you could build but you don't have to. So I think that's a better way of doing it, is building all the queries, and they're called scopes, I think, in Yi. You build all those scopes or queries into the record itself as much as possible, and then you just call that query on the record from your service layer. But then you'll see, I think what they do is they still do just query the database generally, because Craft is dealing with so much stuff across records and dealing with more than just records. Like they've got other tables I think most things are records, but yeah. So they're doing custom queries inside their service.
I didn't hear it talked about too publicly, but at one point I think they were using. So there's two different types of queries happening here. So when you install your plugin, or some of these just run and create database tables for you,
Yes.
and I guess that's because Craft is running the function define attributes on kind of on install, or whatever's happening there. But at one point, I forget the type of, there's different types of queries. One is where you kind of define it and then it runs itself. And then there's this other one which is done with the query builder. And at one point they had all of their queries set up in the kind of defined way, and apparently it was a lot slower. And so they migrated a lot of those queries to this other way. That's my understanding. So I'm not sure. Maybe you can um, run the lighter version of the queries within the record file as well. I'm not sure what's possible there.
I would think for plugin purposes, unless you're doing a lot of joins with or relationships with the core tables, the core records in Craft, I don't know how much slower. I haven't seen that article or what they've said about speed and stuff, but it's worked okay for me so far, having the scopes inside the record. I know, does someone else want to chime in on that?
I'm not sure if this addresses what you guys are talking about, but writing the database query that way as opposed to just writing a database query normally, I think that's to support other databases besides MySQL. Is that what you guys are discussing?
Yeah, kind of. So yeah, you're right. So what we've got highlighted there on the screen is using the database query builder, and I assume it's using the Yi database query builder. You can say he's selecting account and he's going from this table and adding some conditions onto the query, and that's right. That will mean that the Yi will have some adapters from other databases, and so it might be able to build a SQL query that works for that database.
Right. So
Yep.
So then, if you were to use that same query builder in your plugin, and in the future Craft was able to support other databases besides MySQL, your plugin would also be able to support those databases.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. The additional point. Yeah, sorry, go for it.
Yeah, so there's one point. So what Ben has highlighted there, it's part of the Fluent Query Builder interface, and once all of those functions get called, it essentially just creates a long query string, whereas the other ones may resolve relationships first. So there might be more than one query being executed depending on whether you use joins or not. Does that make sense?
You're saying that depending on how the query builder is structured, it might use more than one actual query.
Right. So the highlighted one, that one will actually create a long string, or basically a long SQL string that will get submitted to the database. So if there are some where clauses where because you could create joins with that Fluent interface as well, but it will submit it as one string. Whereas the other one, depending on how you define it, the queries, there might be more than one query to get executed in order to first get the foreign key for something, or the content of one table to submit to the other one. Does that make sense?
So Ben,
it does.
Yeah, if you jump back over to the record, you're saying that the reason why they were finding it slow to put queries on the record, or scopes, I think Yi calls them, is because of the relationships, and the fact that Yi, or the query builder, when you define the query there and just call the query, because if you have a lot of relationships, it's not going to be as efficient as building your own SQL query through the database query.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you could manually write a query, you might write a very complex query that is just one. essentially it just execute once. But when you are, defining the attributes in the relationships, the database handler might, not a database handler, but the code base that submits the queries might find it more effective to separate the queries into two, one to kind of get the relationships or extract the foreign keys or something like that. But essentially you'll be, you could execute 1, 2, 3 queries just to do something that you might get away with one query from the Fluent Query Builder.
So, but I would suggest for us, I mean, to try and follow the convention of the record, the base of the Yee's records, because then you'll be able to, if you look at the Yee documentation, I think it gets linked inside the craft records documentation. It links over to the Yee records, because anything you can do with a craft record class, you can do with is a Yee record class. So I would look at the records documentation in Yee, and I think just experiment with creating like a scope. Do they call them scopes, Sylvan?
Are you referring to the relationships, or what do you mean by scope? Because I don't think
you can create it's almost like a bottled query, and you can chain them. So you might have a scope called top 10, and it would limit by the top 10, and then you might have another scope called females only, and then you could say widget record method top 10 method females only, or for example, and you can chain those kind of queries on the record. Anyway, I'm just saying, I think try and use the normal way with the records. Use all the things that records give you inside the Yee documentation, and I wouldn't worry so much about building a custom query like not with the query builder, unless you're really finding that something's slow, or you're feeling like the query is not efficient.
Yeah.
We'll have to quiz Brad on what they're running into, because they're probably dealing with a lot more loading than some of the plugins we're dealing with. Like when you're installing a plugin, like you don't have to worry about overload or anything like that. Well,
yeah, and I think that's why I think that Luke's point is is valid, because really this is a clean way of defining something. Without having to worry about the from select and all that kind of stuff, which at least to me is a little it's a little more understandable. For like, I think that if people write a lot of SQL, they want to have that kind of like manual or granular control. But if you're doing a lot of the simple stuff that you do with plugins, because they don't really get that complicated. You're usually querying just one table, 2 or 3 at the most, and I think leaving that in the record, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, it's the same principle with the services. I mean, services are dealing with the logic, and if you try and keep your queries logic associated with the records, the database layer, then you're going to have a better time, I think.
I agree.
All right, so maybe I know Selvin's a fan of the enum folder, and maybe since we're talking about defining our schema with the craft method of defining things, we can start looking in there. So what I'm speaking of is this attribute type : class name sort order mixed. This isn't Yee that's doing this. This is a layer that craft built on top of Yee. To deal with data validation and whatnot. So all of this isn't documented yet. I think a lot of us are trying to understand what it does and what it all means sometimes. And I know Selvin was mentioning to me earlier that some of those answers are in the enums folder. Would it help if I opened any specific file?
Yeah. So basically, and I think everybody probably knows this, but enums, it's short for enumerated sets, and it's basically an array with predefined values. kind of like MySQL if you worked with it. But anyways, there is, they have two of the classes that can give you a lot of information is the attribute type and column type PHP files. And they kind of interact with one another or kind of relate to each other in a way. So let's see what. So the attribute type file will have a bunch of constants that define what attributes you can use to define the type of value you're planning to store. But if you look on the left there, you have a number and you also have a string constant. And if you're familiar with MySQL, you'll know that MySQL has different containers or data types to store strings, starting with the variable character, the character itself, text, medium text, and long text. So one of the first questions that I had to kind of answer to myself as I was working with it is, okay, I can use the attribute type of string to define the type of data I want to store. But what if I want it to be, greater than a variable character, which only accepts 255 characters? That's where the column type definition comes in. And Craft is doing something smart behind the scenes. So if you define the attribute type of string and then set a maximum length or max length of 250, then it will automatically create a varchar for you. But if you want something big, like let's say you have a field type of Markdown that's going to store a lot of text, then it's best if you are actually going to define the kind of column that you want. So you can define your attribute as string and then your column type as text, small text, medium text, and that will ensure that the proper database column is being created for your content. So those are two things that are always a good reminder to kind of, and the same with the number, you get one number attribute type, and obviously MySQL has int, small int, and so on. So depending on what you're storing, you can make your definition very accurate. So that's what I had on that.
So each of these attribute types would have a default column type according to Craft, but you can override that by specifying the column type.
Correct. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll see any column types. We'll find
Luke,
some
I think you're talking, but I can't hear you, Luke.
Sorry.
Oh, there you
Yeah, I
go.
put it. In your record that you make, you define the fields or the columns of the table, but do you automatically get like an ID?
Actually,
column?
no, yeah, you do with records. So if you have a model that matches a record, you actually have to add the ID to the model, but you don't have to add it to the record.
Okay.
So I don't know if we could maybe look at the widget model and see what we... You're not submitting any widget forms to worry about anything there. But yeah, in plugin development, I've found like if you're defining, if you don't need to define the ID for the record.
There's an idea for a plugin, a widget builder form.
Widget builder, yeah.
Widget builder form.
Oh.
This is kind of off topic, but has anybody found a plugin scaffolding generator yet, like there is for EE and others?
I started looking to build one. We should build one.
Oh, yeah. Well, share it when you have it ready.
I was even thinking of building it like as in Twig templating language.
Oh, really?
So you build the files or the classes in Twig, and then just put Twig tags in for the names and things like that. Yeah, I think it would be awesome. It would really help I think we should do it because it would really set up. I mean, Expression Engine did have like, I'm not sure who built them. It did have like a generator plugin, and it even generated some of the database like SQL that you needed to run to set up your tables.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it wasn't really like it didn't get updated very often. It was kind of.
Yeah.
I think it would be really awesome from the control panel to say, I'd like to make a new plugin, give it its name, give it its records, all the columns, and then,
Yeah.
and, I mean, even for element types. Like, what if you wanted to have an element type and you didn't want it to be an entry, like, you just wanted it to be and generate an element type? I don't know how well that would go down with Pixel and Tonic, but that's kind of skirting the multiple sections on the Publish Pro. But anyway, yeah, I think we should do it. Anyway.
We're going to have to talk a little more about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of plugins that would help like that, like just populating content and getting data out. You know, everybody needs them to
boilerplate
understand what's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, even
we
just
still have
even if it would be cool, like even with a live plugin, like I've done Ruby on Rails development, and you know, anytime I want, I can spin up a new controller by typing, you know, Rails new controller, and pass along some of the methods my controller should have, and it will build that controller. And I think that would really help with, even after you've created the initial plugin, you say, I want a controller, and press a button, and it will create that controller for your plugin.
I think it'd help a lot with simple use cases too, because I find myself using plugins most for just simple variable, like, you know, you need to query the database in a slightly different way, so you have a plugin that you just pretty much have a variables file, you query the database, get what you want, give it back to your form, and you're good to go. And it's just a little, you know, having a one-click setup to get that query going and getting the data you need on the page would be a nice touch.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well,
you could make like a gen. We're getting off topic, but you could make like a
You can tell Luke is excited about that topic.
Yeah.
Look at him. Look at him smile.
I like brainstorming plugin ideas. I've got too many unfinished ones. You could make like a plugin that you could define your queries. If you're doing that multiple times all the time, creating a new variables file, or you could build it so that you could define that in the UI, the queries. So you could build unlimited number of variables in the control panel, so that you could use them on the front end. But anyway, I'll stop now.
The gears are turning.
Yeah.
All right.
Do we have time to look at the helpers folder at all?
Yeah, let's make it to the helpers folder and maybe try to get variables in, and then we can wrap up. So helpers, anybody using them?
Not yet.
They're worth a read. Craft has a lot of.
I call helper files like junk folders. I mean, they're great. They're good. They are good to put functions.
There is a lot of useful stuff there, and there is always that concern about, you know, stability. Is it gonna change? You know, that sort of thing. There's quite a lot of stuff that Craft has extended, that it's simply extending it for the purpose of namespacing. So, you know, like there's a lot of stuff where all you see is just the namespace definition and then a class definition that extends a ye component. So there's quite a few of those. The helpers, though, they have a lot of functions that. Let's see, Ben, can you open up the IO helper class? See what that one has.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I'm beginning to wonder, should I have my screen selected for the broadcast so people could actually see it?
I just clicked on it.
I selected your screen. I don't know.
Yeah, we can do that individually, so I think we're good.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the recorded version of this.
Yeah.
Details, details.
Oh,
We live, we
yeah.
learn.
Yeah. So anyway,
Start
there's
again.
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning.
let's do this over. Let's get it started. So there's quite a there's a lot of really useful stuff that they are bringing. Let's put it this way: there's a lot of functionality in the helpers that come straight from the Yi core, so they are very unlikely to change. And some examples of that is like JSON encoding and decoding. Obviously, PHP has their own, and you can just JSON encode or JSON decode or whatever. But Yi does that, and Craft has a JSON helper that is extending the CJSON components from Yi. Whoa! Look, got my little bird landed on my head. Hey, little bird, go.
Trying to get him in the shot.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
back again.
Is that another one?
It's a boomerang bird.
Look at that. There you go. It kind of keeps me company at night, when I'm coding away. But anyways, I'm using a lot of this stuff, and I'm using it with one of the plugins that I'm getting ready to release to the public. But I built a wrapper around it. So for a couple of the JSON functions, I'm defining my own function that will essentially make use of those. But I'm first checking whether the function exists and that sort of thing. So the idea is that I think that we can make use of this rather than creating our own like little library and stuff for simple use cases, because I think that our tendency as developers is that whenever we need a little function to encode or decode JSON or just some file IO, we want to create our library, or a little helper class right away. But I think that the helpers folder is worth taking a look at, because a lot of this stuff it's already being handled. And as an example, I was working on a file upload plugin from the front end, and also image manipulation. And Craft wrote their own image manipulation class, which is used for the transforms. But Yi has something similar, and it has a lot of really good I/O functionality. So there's quite a few things that you can kind of take advantage of without having to create your own little external library within your plugins. And I think
that's a really good point. Honestly, because of my inexperience with Yi, I've tended to grab tools like using Packagist and Composer, a file system library
from Symfony.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would have.
Yep.
I think I even did that. If you're looking at code, like I'm just being lazy, and I've just said, give me Symfony's file system stuff, and included it in my plugin. And you're right, it's totally redundant, because I'm sure Yi can handle all that stuff through its helpers and classes, itself just as well, and it's already loaded. I'm increasing the load time of loading all these Symfony stuff. So I'm gonna get set to work to remove all that stuff from my plugins and start using the Yi helpers.
Yeah, I think it's worth exploring at least. It may not be useful in all cases, but I think a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of useful stuff, and I don't know what Pixel and Tonic's stand is on it, but I would I'm definitely using it myself, and
I mean the only you're right though. I mean that's the only danger, is that they decide to inherit from a different I/O library and don't use the Yi one for some reason, and if you're using their one, then you might.
Right.
But that's just dependency issues in all programming. I mean,
right.
If you are really paranoid, you could just include everything inside your own plugin, but it does pay to use the stuff that's already been loaded.
Right. And like I said, there's a couple of things like like you can for more advanced plugins, like you can write your own class that will wrap or make a lot of those function calls safe so that in case that something does change, it'll be really easy to switch, what functions
Okay.
get called. And that's kind of what I've started to implement myself because I've done a lot of playing around with you know and I think Ben can probably kind of attest to how much we've looked into plugin dependencies and how to make them share the same code base, but at the same time make them self-contained. So there's a few like you hit a roadblock in each direction because if you have a set of custom functions or custom classes that you want to include within your plugin, every developer, especially a craft plugin developer, you're not just going to build one plugin. You're going to build a lot of them because it's just fun to build, and fun to write code. So it's like you want to keep a lot of things dry. You don't want to, write a lot of the same code. But you'll come across that problem where, if you're using the same included class or custom class in one plugin or in more than one plugin, you may get some auto-loading conflicts or name conflicts and that sort of thing. So it's not really easy and straightforward to figure that part out. So I think it's always to try to come up with a strategy of I'm going to use the helpers or whatever, or I'm going to write my own, but I'm going to make them safe so that they don't create conflicts with other of my, my same plugins and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But obviously, that's a topic for a different day, I think.
Yeah.
So.
My comment about junk drawer was not so much that it's a Yi junk drawer or a craft junk drawer. Sometimes what people do is they put a lot of functions into helpers.
Yeah.
That really makes sense to just sit within the class.
Sure.
Of what you're doing. So that's the only. But
yeah.
It definitely makes sense for all. IO helpers, array helpers, things like that. Definitely makes sense to have helpers.
Yeah.
So this is, I'm loving all this. It's super fascinating. But can we jump to the variables? Because I'm going to have to go in the not too distant future here. So.
So I guess I would frame the variables as this is where you start to output stuff to your page, and it seems to me this is the location. This is where Twig and Yi kind of meet, or Twig and Craft kind of. I don't know. Variables seem to be this nexus of where all of these systems come together, and allow us to output data to the page. I don't fully understand if this is Twig necessarily, though. It's not Twig, but it seems to be the one connection in the plugin folder to Twig. And
so if you're manually using Twig, like outside of Craft, you would point Twig to a template file or a template string, and then you would supply it with data, so that the template would know how to replace all the variables that with the data that you've passed to the template. So I suppose this is more so. It is, you're right. It is where they meet, because I think it's where Craft grabs all the variables that the system wants to provide to that template, and puts it inside the. But what it's doing is putting it inside the Craft namespace to supply it to the template. So I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you do make a variable in here called yell or something, that it has to be, it's always supplied within the Craft namespace of craft dot your plugin name dot that variable. You can't create like global variables for Craft for Twig from this folder. Am I right in that?
I think you are correct in that, and the reason for it is that the variables, the variable classes, and all the methods defined within it, and all the public properties that are defined within it, are basically It's exactly what you said at the very beginning, because if you want to parse a template um, from within your code, you would pass along the template and then the variables that you want to make available to that template. Variables is doing the same thing on a larger scale, because since we're using PHP 5.3, where basically you're not only able to take advantage of the properties that are defined within the class, but also call the methods within it. And but essentially that's kind of what's happening. The variables become available to the template via the craft namespace, as you pointed out.
Yeah. So if you open up one of those, I'm not sure which.
Let's go with the complicated logo variable.
So just this is a question I have. So what you just said, Ben Selvin, is that it supplies this class, and the properties of the class are available as well as variables, not just the methods.
Right. Well, theoretically, it should support the properties as well, and you could try it out, because you've noticed that you can call the method with or without braces or parentheses if it doesn't take any arguments. And the theory is that Craft will resolve that, and behind the scenes, I'm sure there is some sort of is callable being used to see whether that's a method or a property, and it would be a matter of just kind of testing out and kind of pushing the boundaries. I haven't really needed to use any public properties in a variable, but you might very well it might yield output, because I think that's kind of what Craft wants. So. Unless it returns a value.
The same. I've made all of my variables methods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is that? Have you got questions around this, Lindsay?
No, I'm just kind of soaking it all in. Some of this stuff is a little above me, but if it's above my head, I'm like just below it. I'm like, I almost get what you're talking about. So I'm just trying to kind of soak.
We're all just faking it, man.
Yeah, take it till you make it, right?
We're just making things up as making things up.
I'll stop admitting it.
We've all got imposter syndrome.
Yeah, if Brandon or if Brad and Brandon were here, we'll be quiet. I would be playing with my parrot right now.
There's always someone smarter in the room, right? Yeah. So I mean, this is great. I mean, I'm taking a lot of this in. I'm looking forward to more of these conversations. I really get the feeling like this group is going to be here for every single one of these. And we're all building on the same knowledge base. Some of us know Yi a little bit, and some of us know Twig a little bit. We're all coming from different backgrounds. Some of us know Expression Engine a little bit, but at the same rate, we're all new to Craft. New to Craft plugins.
Yeah.
So, did you just boo Expression Engine?
Wow.
That's
Remember, this is going to go live.
I'm joking. I like Expression Engine. I've used it for a long time. I was just making a joke.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Don't post any blogs about it. That's all right.
Well, this is going public, so I'm going to stop there.
So here's a tip.
I was just going to say, on the variables, you'll see that what they do, and this is a convention I think we should all try and follow, is that you don't do any logic in this, or you try not to. So you can see most of the time it's just calling a service, or it's just calling a service. I think most of the time, and you should try and stick to the same deal with your plugin variables, because you don't want to spread that logic around. And so if you needed to have an if statement, if else on that variable, try and put that inside a function on your service, a method on your service, and just return that answer to the call in the variable.
I've got two kind of tips, you could call it, or tricks. I don't know what you want to call it, regarding variables. But let's say that you had a need for, let's say that you had a variable class that had a bunch of methods that really they just kind of give you information back. So maybe you wanted to store a lot of information about a site within the variables or whatever. So you can kind of import craft dot whatever the name of your plugin is into a way shorter variable, and you can use it. So you can set it at the top of the template and then use it below it without the craft namespace. Does that make sense? So
So
let's say that I have a plugin called spam guard, for example. So I have a variable called spam guard variable.php. So from the template, if I wanted access to the get plugin name method, I would have to use craft.spamguard.plugin or get plugin name, right? But if I had a lot of those and I was going to use that a lot within that same template, I could simply set a variable to something like guard or plugin or something, and then assign the value of craft spam guard. And then I'll be able to call the methods on that short name. Does that make sense?
I see.
I'm basically importing the value from.
You put that in your like initialize.
Yeah, like you can within a set,
constructor
like you can set. Well, within the template itself on Twig, you can say, set like.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what you're saying is if you're calling your own plugins variables a lot.
Yeah.
You could set and it's making a string that's quite long to call that variable because it's including the craft.plugin name. Then you can set. Yes. You could do a set. Yep.
Okay.
And
I
that will
was adding the import in the wrong place.
What's that?
I was adding an import in the wrong place, trying to think through what you were doing. So I didn't realize you were in the template.
In the template itself is saying in Twig, set craft.plugin name to just a small variable name, so that in your templates it's a lot shorter to use. If you're going to be using calling your plugin a lot from a template, that's a good tip.
So that's one tip, and that also helps. Like, a lot of people start developing plugins and they don't really know what it's going to be called yet. So it's also a good way to kind of set something to plugin or whatever, and then just use it down below. And I mean, obviously, you can easily replace it, but it's just a quick tip. The other one is if you are including your own library for some reason, like like if you're creating your own custom helpers and including it within the plugin, you can define in one single file, you can define a whole bunch of methods, and basically you can have that file extend the variables, and then from your variable file you can extend that class. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So that's kind of a more
on the screen there where it's saying the plugin variable extends base component type.
Type variable. So
this plugin variable could actually define a whole bunch of things, and all your other variables could inherit from it.
Correct. Exactly. So you can use kind of inheritance there to keep all basically always define just one variable file or one variable class.
Yes.
But then have them separated into your own, like basically maybe you have like app variables, or like maybe you have whatever. Like you can have them on different folders, or you can just have one big file that defines all the methods that you want to make available to the plugin. But then from the actual variable class, you're actually going to be extending the class, the custom class that you create on your own library, which itself will extend base component type variable, which is kind of it's a fancy way of doing things, and it may not necessarily be more helpful. It's just another way of doing things.
Hey, next time, Sylvan, I think we should all take turns. Doing that demonstration in code, because obviously it makes it's easier to
Yeah.
understand
Do
when
a
you can
screen
see it.
share. Yeah, that's actually interesting
Yeah.
because
And
as
me,
you're
me coding what Selvin is saying is not what
Yeah.
anybody wants.
Yeah, I was like, when you started writing craft import, I was like, yeah, okay, I'm trying to. And then you said it's in the template. I'm like, what?
Right, right.
We're just
yeah, I
trying to
mean,
make it fun for people to figure out
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
It's,
Yeah.
it's like, look
it's
Yeah.
over here.
yeah, magic tricks.
No.
But I
Well,
think
So
it's a
honest.
yeah,
fair point to do a
I think
screen
we should do
share.
that.
Yeah,
Sorry, go.
If Selvin has, like for example, like what Luke just said, if Selvin is trying to demonstrate something, feel free to share your screen and type it out for us. I mean, I'm sure
Right.
we're all visual learners,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that would be great. Next time.
Next time, yeah, we,
Yeah.
you
But
know,
it's a good
Ben
tip.
and I were kind of just trying to figure out how all this is gonna work out. But I'm really passionate about, talking to the community and see what other developers are wanting to learn, wanting to share, and our interests, lie in different places, but we also kind of share the common. Kind of like I feel like a kid in a candy store when I open up Craft and I want to start a new plugin. I mean, really, the possibilities are endless, so I think Ben and I were just trying to figure out, let's just make it happen, even if we just are made to feel stupid by Google, and everybody's making fun of ourselves. We just kind of wanted to get it done and get people involved and hopefully learn as well.
Yeah,
I think it's
totally.
excellent.
Yeah,
It's awesome. I mean, I don't know how you guys are all structured, but I'm guessing that you're mostly all solo or doing this on the side or freelance, or you're not in a big team of craft developers, and so it's awesome to be able to share knowledge. It's going to speed up and advance the craft platform and help us get more users that buy our plugins sooner.
Yeah.
If we're delivering quality code sooner through sharing things, then
Yep.
it's just going to help everyone. So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we'll also be getting less calls from clients sooner who are worried about how to use their website because it'll just be easy to use.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That's true. That's
Um,
true.
All right, guys, I've got to jump. I hear a crying baby in the other room.
All right.
But this has been awesome. I really appreciate all this information, and looking forward to doing this again. So, keep it
And
going.
keep it at the same time, please.
Yeah.
You want it at the same time?
It's the first thing I've been able to do. I haven't been able to come to any of the chats because it's been 4 a.m. or 3
I'm okay
a.m.
with the time, but how do you guys feel about Thursdays?
Largely, we were debating times, and we ultimately just decided to do it when it fit our schedule because otherwise we weren't going
Right.
to do it. And this is a little bit after our work day, so it's kind of a little freer in our days, and it worked out. I feel there's always going to be somebody around, and
Yeah.
if we can
Yeah.
broadcast them, I think this time works good for us. And some days it might be Tuesday, sometimes it might be Thursday. I don't know how structured we're going to claim it is right now because
That's
it's
fair.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I
if you
think
have
too-
like a pet topic you really want us to do, we could try to coordinate a little bit. If it would be helpful.
Yeah. If there's something specific that, I mean, everybody, like Luke just said, we're all freelancers here, so our schedules are in flux. If it happens on a Tuesday, I'll try and be there on a Tuesday. All right, I got to jet. It's getting worse out there.
Yeah.
All right.
Good luck.
Take care,
I got
Lindsay.
Thanks, guys.
I know how it
Later,
is.
Lindsay.
Later.
Yeah.
Cool.
Are
Yes.
we finishing up? Are we going to do a couple more things? Or what's everyone's time?
I have to wrap up pretty soon as well. Maybe you got 10, 15 more minutes if we want it. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other topics. We kind of covered. We got through what we were. I don't know. We got through
Well,
enough of
we did well.
This, hopefully this doesn't get into a rabbit hole where we're not going to find the end, but who's interested in multi-environment config? I know Ben is a big fan of making that kind of, making it accessible or easy to work with, I suppose. Luke, Ben has one of the, I don't know, if you were to look at one of his HC access files, he's got a lot of really cool stuff going on with his multi-environment stuff, and I know for Expression Engine he does, and a lot of cool stuff there. So that might be a topic that we might want to learn from. How do you think
Yeah.
about sharing, Ben?
I mean, I don't mind sharing what we got right now, but I also feel we're waiting on Pixel and Tonic to do a few more things to make our lives fully multi-environment capable. So I'd
That's true.
almost say let's wait for that to happen, and then we can really try to push that a little bit more. Because there's going to be a point where we just kind of have to stop and say, and this isn't configurable right now. And
Yeah, this won't work.
Yeah, 100 workarounds is interesting, but not
Yeah.
so educational for people. Yeah.
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 So are you talking, when you say multi-environment, are you talking about multiple websites running off the same
No,
app folder, really, or?
No, I mean, I don't know how you're structured either, but we're a small business and we deal with a lot of client websites. So we always have a local development production kind of workflow where we've got maybe multiple developers working in a local instance of the site, and then we've got a development or staging site where the client can review stuff and uses a playground maybe, and then we've got a live site. And so the first thing to happen when you're working between environments is all the paths break when you push something to the next environment, and then you're stuck kind of editing URLs for 20 minutes before you're back up and running again.
Yeah. Or database credentials and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the basics are we're routing, instead of just using general.php and db.php in the config folder, we're checking for environment before we get there, and then routing. We're using those as kind of the most general level config, and then we have environment specific configs for each environment.
Right. Yes, I got thrown off by the multi. So this is purely to do with local staging, production, environment.
What would you call that? Out of curiosity.
You're right. I just was thinking. I was thinking the wrong thing.
I think he was thinking
was I typing
multi-site.
craft import?
Yeah, I was thinking multi-site. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I am interested in that. Yes, and that's what I've done in the past. Is just modify those to do detections on URLs and change the configuration variables. But I haven't had to do that like on a mass scale and standardize it across things. I've just done it ad hoc. So it would be interesting to learn that once we're ready for it.
I think we'll wait. Yeah, I think we'll wait a little. We've got a lot of interesting ideas. We were thinking for next, even just talking about how we're all customizing our craft workflow, or talking about routing more specifically, and just starting to look at what's happening there, because craft does that pretty interesting as well. There's a whole list, so feel free to drop us ideas.
Maybe we can just compile a bit of a list on the community of things that we want to look at, and we can have a bit of a chat about it.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else we want to touch on. I mean, we could jump into something else, or I don't.
Let me. Has it? Well, we won't go to the new. I'm just looking in the app folder to see if I can see anything that I need to ask a question about while I've got you guys.
That's a good strategy.
Yeah. All right, free developer support. No.
Free developer support. Let's see.
Yeah, I think I don't.
Yeah, no, we can leave it there. I think that's great. We can if we do this weekly, it'd be huge, it'd be massive.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we enjoy it enough to do it weekly. It's a matter of whether we can fit it in our schedules, but I think we'll try. Yeah, because it would really help, especially with the element types coming out. Luke, from your comments online too, I feel you're somebody that's like immediately understood the power of element types out there. I feel a lot of people haven't really grasped like what the, I personally think a lot of people are comparing Craft to other CMSs right now, and
Yeah.
they
Especially
haven't yet
EE.
realized how powerful element types are and how like paradigm shifting the concept is
Yeah.
for how you're going to approach building your websites and plugins.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think I've fully understood everything. I'm keen for them. I'm excited that I'm in this developer group now on Google Plus, and I have just quickly skimmed his introduction to element types, but I really haven't read any of what he said in detail. And I haven't even looked at the dev version of 1.1 or whatever it is. So I'm just going off what I've guessed would be happening with element types based on looking at the code base of 1.0. So, but I am excited because it's making plugins entities or main entities first-class citizens inside the ecosystem, whereas in Expression Engine you kind of had to, if you wanted the full power of that type of thing, you'd have to use channels. Like everyone would use channels or build off channels, and channels were focused around publishing content, just like entries are, where publish date and expiry dates and all that kind of stuff. Where element types are, I think, a bit more generic, and so, but yet they're still first-class citizens for relationships and things like that. So that's why I'm excited about it. My plugin, if I made a store or a commerce plugin and I've got products are a first-class citizen in Craft, whereas in Expression Engine, if you have a product, you can see in all the different way the commerce plugins for Expression Engine work. Some of them use a completely separate table, their own table for products. Some of them attach every product to a Craft entry, an Expression Engine channel entry. So there was always confusion about where to put those kinds of things in Expression Engine, but with Craft they'll be first class. So yeah, that's my spiel on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, I think you're muted.
Let me end the broadcast maybe and see how that goes, and we can maybe chat for another minute.
I think the microphone thing is happening, Ben.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Great.
good time to stop.